My father kicked me out of the house when I was 17 and then wanted me to give my house to my younger sister. When I was 17, my father kicked me out of the house for something I didn't do. I still remember the look on his face when he shoved my duffel bag into my hands. Disappointment, anger, like I wasn't his son anymore. And all because of a lie. My sister, Sully, had stolen money from his wallet. Not much, maybe a couple $100, but enough for him to go on a rampage when he noticed. I had been in my room, studying for an exam I knew I had to ace if I wanted any shot at college, when he barged in, yelling accusations before I even understood what was happening. Sully just stood behind him, wide-eyed, shaking her head like she had no idea how the money disappeared. I begged him to listen, to ask her again, but he didn't. He always believed her over me. So, I left. I was homeless for a while, couch-surfing when I could, sleeping in my car when I couldn't. Life had no mercy for kids with nowhere to go. I learned fast, how to work without getting caught up in bad deals, how to keep my head down but my ears open. I climbed my way up, brick by brick, mistake by mistake. And then, years later, when I was standing in the foyer of my 5-bedroom house, the one I had bought with my own hands, my father walked back into my life like nothing had happened. "You did well for yourself," he said, looking around, his hands in his pockets. I didn't say anything. "Your sister's getting married," he continued, glancing over his shoulder. "She could really use a place like this." I nearly laughed. "Use a place like this? You want me to give my house to Sully?" He exhaled, like this was exhausting for him. "It's not like you don't have the money to buy another one." I let that sink in. I had spent years scraping my way out of the hole he threw me into. Now he wanted me to dig Sully out of hers. Sully, who had gone to college on his dime. Sully, who had lived in comfort while I had slept in parking lots. Sully, who had stolen from him and let me take the fall. I could feel the old resentment bubbling up, thick and bitter. But I kept my voice even. "I think she'll be fine," I said. His expression darkened. "So you'd rather see your sister struggle than help her?" I smiled, slow and deliberate. "She wasn't too worried about me when I was struggling, was she?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time, he didn't have anything to say. And then, just like that, I knew, I had already won. I expected my father to walk away after that conversation. He wasn't the kind of man to beg, and he sure as hell wasn't one to grovel. But instead of leaving with his pride intact, he did something worse, he came back. Not alone. The next day, I opened my front door to find Sully standing beside him, her arms crossed, an insufferable pout on her lips. "Hey, big brother," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Mind if we come in?" I did mind. But I stepped aside anyway. They walked in like they belonged there, like they had some kind of claim on my space. My father didn't even bother taking his shoes off as he wandered into my living room, glancing at the framed photos on the mantel. "Nice place," he muttered. Sully made herself comfortable on my couch, smoothing down the designer dress I knew she hadn't paid for herself. "Dad told me you weren't too thrilled about helping me out." "I'm not." She laughed, like it was a joke. "Come on, you've always been like this. A little selfish, a little dramatic." I raised an eyebrow. "Selfish? You mean like how you let me take the blame for stealing from Dad and never bothered to tell the truth?" That wiped the smirk right off her face. Dad shot me a look, but I ignored him. I had let Sully get away with too much for too long. She had spent her entire life coasting on the safety net my father provided, never once thinking about what it meant for me. And now she was here, acting like I owed her something. She sighed heavily, as if this whole conversation was exhausting for her. "Look, I know we had our issues growing up, but this isn't about the past. This is about family. You have this huge house, and I have nothing." I stared at her. "You have a fiancé, don't you? Why isn't he getting you a place?" She shifted uncomfortably. "That's complicated." I glanced at Dad. "What's going on?" He hesitated. That's when I knew. Something was wrong. And then, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking together, it hit me. I walked over to Sully, leaned against the arm of the couch, and looked her right in the eye. "Your fiancé left you, didn't he?" Her face twitched. "Bingo." Dad cleared his throat. "That's not." I cut him off. That's exactly what happened. He left, and now she has nothing. And instead of figuring it out like an adult, you thought you could just drop her into my life like she's my problem. Sully's face turned red. That's not true. Really? I tilted my head. Then why haven't you mentioned him once since you walked in? Silence. I let out a breath, shaking my head. You're unbelievable. Dad finally spoke up. She just needs some time, that's all. A place to get back on her feet. You have more than enough space. No. They both looked at me in shock. I crossed my arms. I spent years building this life, with no help from either of you. And now you want to waltz in and take from me like I owe you? I don't. Sully's eyes glistened, but I wasn't falling for it. You're choosing to abandon your family, she whispered. I almost laughed. You abandoned me years ago, Sully. This is just me returning the favor. Dad clenched his jaw, his face dark with anger. You'll regret this. No, I said, walking to the door and holding it open. I think you will. Sully stomped past me, muttering something under her breath, and Dad followed. But before he left, he turned back one last time. You're still my son. I looked him in the eye. That's the problem. And then I shut the door. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. No more chasing after my father's approval. No more pretending Sully and I had some kind of sibling bond. No more being the backup plan for people who never once showed up for me. But of course, people like them don't just walk away quietly. It started small, Sully posting cryptic messages online about how money changes people and how family should always come first. Then, mutual acquaintances started reaching out, asking why I had abandoned my struggling sister in her time of need. I ignored it. Then came the real problem. 3 days after I kicked them out, I got home from work and found Sully's car parked in my driveway. She was sitting on the hood, scrolling through her phone like she had all the time in the world. I sighed, already exhausted. What do you want, Sully? She hopped off the car, flipping her hair over her shoulder. Dad's sick. I stared at her. Sick how? She shrugged, far too casual for someone talking about a dying parent. You know. Stress, high blood pressure, the usual. I narrowed my eyes. And this has what to do with me? Sully sighed dramatically, placing a hand on her hip. Don't be heartless, okay? He's struggling. This whole situation has been really hard on him. I crossed my arms. I'm sure it has. Come on, she pressed. He's been asking for you. I should have left it at that. I should have told her to get lost. But some part of me, some stupid, lingering part, still wondered if maybe, just maybe, my father had finally realized what he'd done. So, like an idiot, I let her convince me to visit. I drove to the house they had taken from me years ago, the house I had paid for, the one they had tricked me into giving up. And when I walked in, it was like stepping back into a past I had long buried. Dad was sitting in his old recliner, looking thinner than I remembered, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He glanced up when I walked in, then sighed, rubbing his forehead like I was a problem he was too tired to deal with. Sully flopped onto the couch, watching us like a spectator waiting for a show. I stayed standing. You wanted to see me? Dad leaned back, stretching his legs out. I hear you've been doing well. I nodded. Yeah. I have. He let out a slow breath. You know, I think about the past a lot these days. I waited. When I kicked you out, he continued, I thought I was doing the right thing. You were always so difficult, so rebellious. I thought if I pushed you hard enough, you'd turn into something better. I clenched my jaw. And now? He looked at me, something unreadable in his expression. And now I see that maybe I pushed too hard. I felt a flicker of something. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe an opening. Then Sully ruined it. She stretched lazily and said, anyway, now that we've cleared that up, can you wire me some money? The flicker died instantly. I turned to her. What? She waved a hand. Just a little something to get me by. It's not a big deal. I laughed. A short, humorless laugh. Dad shifted uncomfortably. She's had a tough time since the wedding fell through. Oh, has she? I said dryly. Sully pouted. It's not like you can't afford it. I turned back to my father. So this is why you called me here? Not to apologize, not to make things right, but because you need something from me? Dad frowned. That's not fair. No? I took a step closer. You threw me out when I was 17, let me fend for myself, and now you suddenly remember I exist because you need money? Sully groaned. God, why do you have to be so dramatic all the time? I turned to her, finally letting go of the last shred of patience I had. You know what's dramatic? Stealing from Dad and letting me take the blame. What's dramatic is living your whole life off of other people and then acting like it's some kind of injustice when they finally say no. She scoffed. Whatever. I knew you wouldn't help. You've always been selfish. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. You know what? You two deserve each other. I turned to leave. Dad's voice stopped me. If you walk out now, don't bother coming back. I looked over my shoulder, meeting his gaze. I never planned to. And this time, when I walked away, I didn't look back. I didn't expect to feel anything when I walked out of that house for the last time. No anger, no sadness, just the quiet understanding that I was done. But as I drove home, a strange kind of relief settled over me. I had spent years wanting something from my father. Recognition, respect, maybe even an apology. But now, I realized that no matter what I did, he and Sully would never change. They would always take. They would always assume I was just another resource for them to use. That night, I blocked both of their numbers. Not out of spite, but because I finally understood, people like them don't deserve access to my life. The next few weeks were quiet. Peaceful, even. Work kept me busy, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next betrayal. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something told me to pick up. Hello? Hi, is this? The woman on the other end hesitated. Is this Edward? I frowned. Who's asking? My name is Helen. I work at First National Bank. I need to verify some information with you regarding a recent loan application. A loan? My stomach sank. I didn't apply for any loan. There was a pause. Oh. That's odd. Because we have an application here under your name. A mortgage loan for a home purchase. But something about it seemed off, so I wanted to confirm before processing it. I clenched my fist. You're telling me someone tried to take out a mortgage, asterisk asterisk in my name, asterisk asterisk for my father's house? Another pause. Yes. The documents list you as the co-signer. It was filed by a Mr. Henry Sullivan. My father. I closed. The next morning, my father called me from a different number. I didn't answer. Then Sully called. Then my aunt. Then a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. I ignored them all. By noon, I got a text from Sully. What did you do? The bank froze Dad's account. We could lose everything. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing my response. Not my problem. And for the first time, I really, truly meant it. Epilogue. I never saw my father or Sully again. The fraud case went through, and while my father didn't end up in jail, he was forced to sell the house to pay off the legal fees. Sully moved in with some friends, still clinging to the belief that the world owed her something. As for me, I thrived. Without them weighing me down, life was lighter. I focused on my work, my future. I even met someone who saw me for who I was, not what I could give them. And sometimes, when I drove past my old neighborhood and saw the empty lot where my father's house used to be, I smiled. Because I knew I had finally won. Not by revenge. Not by anger. But by walking away and never looking back. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.